this video, we will conduct a gender analysis of the conflict in Yemen. Before we begin, here are 3 main points you should take away from our video.
The different gendered experiences in Yemen require humanitarian aid organizations to have a thorough understanding of the challenges that they face in order to provide them with unique aid that tailors to their needs.
It is crucial to understand how these challenges will impact the future, not just the present. For example, how does that lack of access to education today affect the labor force tomorrow?
The erasure of queer minorities from Yemeni society requires particular attention. Humanitarian aid organizations must consider how their engagements will affect the queer community who has no one to advocate on their behalf.
Yemen is a country of 30.5 million people located on the Arabian Peninsula. Like most countries formed arbitrarily by colonial powers, it has a history of political instability. The 2 main actors in this are the Saudi and US-backed government and the Iran-backed Houthi rebels.
Since 2015, Yemen has been locked in an intractable civil war between these 2 main factions that has caused one of the worst humanitarian crises the world has ever seen, driven in large part by the Saudi bombing campaign that has killed at least 100 civilians and a trade blockade that blocked aid from the region. Today we will look at the gendered impacts on Yemen's food and water insecurity, healthcare, and labor market.
Women need more access to clean water while menstruating, during pregnancy, childbirth, and breastfeeding to prevent greater risk of dehydration. High rates of unclean water and lack of basic sanitation services has led to preterm labor, low birth weight, high infant mortality rates, and infections. In addition, the unclean water in Yemen led to the worst outbreak of cholera in modern history. There were 1.2 million suspected cases and 3,000 deaths attributed to it from 2009 to 2019. Pregnant women who contract cholera are at an increased risk of miscarriage, premature delivery, stillbirth, and mother mortality. These effects prove that access to clean water is not only a women's issue, but a societal issue that impacts future generations as well. 61 to 79% of women are the primary purveyors of water in many developing regions, including Yemen. Women perform their gender by giving water to their families and community. This performance is affected when accessing clean and healthy water is impossible. Getting water is also a large physical burden. It has implications for women's health in the form of spinal injury, neck pain, spontaneous abortion from heavy and awkward workloads, and caloric expenditure. When women cannot provide this water due to water-reducing conditions or injury, this puts an extra burden on them as they are unsuccessful at fulfilling their obligations as women. In Yemen, women are the primary caretakers of the home and family. This means that women are expected to feed their husbands and their children first, with them getting whatever food is left. As a result, Yemen has one of the highest levels of female malnutrition in the world. Women who are pregnant and breastfeeding need excess nutrients for their baby to develop healthily or produce enough milk. Yet 1.3 million pregnant or breastfeeding women are experiencing acute malnutrition. These implications extend to their babies, with 2.2 million children under 5 in Yemen suffering from acute malnourishment, which leads to high rates of under 5 mortality. When a family cannot afford to feed their husbands and children adequately, it creates desperation. Women will drop out of school with the tuition fees allocated for food instead. This perpetuates the cycle of men being the only ones educated enough to hold a job, forcing women to need them as providers. It also forces families to marry their daughters younger. When a family gives their daughters away, it reduces the burden on the family for how many mouths they have to feed.
ايش ذنب الاطفال ما نتزوجوهم كذا؟ يعني مثلا انا بحل مشكلتي صح؟ بس بعض الاطفال براءتهم ما يحلوش مشكلتهم، يمكن يموتوا، يمكن ينتحروا، يمكن يفعلوا اللي براسهم، لانهم اطفال ما يدروش بحاجه، يعني عندهم ما تعلموش ولا درسوا ولا حاجه، يعني ايش ذنبنا احنا؟ مش الوحيده انا، يمكن كل الاطفال.
A large part of why so many people in Yemen do not have access to adequate health care is the lack of hospitals and primary care clinics. Right now, only about half of all health facilities in Yemen are functional. And accessing the few remaining healthcare centers that provide necessary services is extremely difficult because of the continued conflict. Patients often have to cross front lines or negotiate their way through multiple security checkpoints just to get to a nearby hospital. Proper treatment is also not guaranteed. The facilities are often staffed by inexperienced workers who aren't trained to manage the types of cases presented to them. Only 20% of Yemen's few operational facilities provide any maternal or child health services. This means that women and children have to bear the brunt of the consequences of the nation's failing healthcare system. The lack of access to adequate reproductive and maternal health care has dangerous and even fatal consequences. In Yemen, a woman dies in childbirth every 2 hours. And for every woman who dies during childbirth, another 20 suffer injuries, infections, or disabilities that are preventable. This is because 60% of births occur without a skilled birth attendant who knows how to identify and respond to the signs of possible health complications. Humanitarian aid to Yemen has been largely underfunded for the duration of the conflict. This remains a barrier to organizations which aim to support Yemenis through providing much-needed healthcare and related resources. In 2020, more than 80 of the 180 UNFPA-supported health facilities closed due to funding gaps. This caused more than 1 million women to lose access to critical care and safe childbirth. However, the UNFPA was still able to reach 3 million women in 2020 to provide them with life-saving reproductive health and women's protection services. At this time, Yemen's penal code prohibits homosexuality. Punishment for same-sex relations ranges from time in prison to death by stoning. Because it's so dangerous to be openly homosexual in Yemen, there is little to no data available about the nation's LGBT population. Additionally, the government censors any digital or print media expressing support of the LGBT community. Because homosexuality is so strongly condemned, there's little access to sexual health care for sexual minorities. There is also no comprehensive sexuality education in Yemen, which means that those participating in same-sex relations are not adequately prepared for the health risks involved. Research suggests that gay men in Yemen are at a particularly high risk for HIV, but they underutilize voluntary counseling and testing services because of the dangers of being discovered and punished for homosexuality.
In the end, it was only when I left my district that I felt free. I could put on makeup, wear dresses, do anything I wanted when I was alone in my room. When I was jailed for 3 months, I was subject to torture. They even broke my tooth. I had electric shocks. I was beaten. It was terrifying.
In Yemen, the law does not mandate equal remuneration for work of equal value for men and women. Women are also severely limited in the jobs they can pursue and where they would like to live. This means that while women may be more present in male-dominated industries, this does not represent progress, given that women are still restricted in many ways. Financial necessity has led to a growing number of women starting new businesses, supported by humanitarian funding, such as programs led by the USAID. But female business owners also find it more difficult than their male counterparts to access dollar bank accounts.
With more women entering the labor market in Yemen, many of them have become the breadwinners of their families. This forces men to participate more in household tasks. But despite this change in power relations, many employers continue to resist laying off male employees as they're still seen as the breadwinners. Unfortunately, female employees aren't treated the same. This creates economic insecurity for families who rely on women for financial stability. And these changing power dynamics create immense psychological stress of failing to provide for their families, which has led to an increase in domestic conflict.
Gender plays a role in many human security issues worldwide. Here we examined how it plays out in food and water security, healthcare, and the labor market in the ongoing Yemen conflict.